Long-term ketosis. There's a lot of buzz about this. It's one of the things that I talk about on my channel quite often in my reaction videos. Lot of talk about long-term ketosis, particularly in a negative light, because it's supposedly a bad thing. You don't want to be in long-term ketosis because, well, that's basically synonymous with developing electrolyte issues, muscle cramping, headaches, migraines, heart palpitations, etc., etc. Also, thyroid hormone issues like lack of muscle mass accumulation given proper stimuli, muscle wasting, basically, in effect, and feeling cold, temperature dysregulation, etc. Now, although those things happen during long-term ketosis, it depends on what definition we're using, and it also depends on if it actually has to do with ketosis or if it has to do with absolute levels of insulin, which are not necessarily exactly the same. Now, that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. What do I mean by long-term ketosis? Long-term ketosis I define as times of low insulin, extended times of insufficient insulin to stimulate anabolic processes. Now, if you've watched my channel long enough, you know what anabolism actually is. Anabolism refers to the building up and storing of things in the body. So this refers to fat storing, it refers to fat creation, but it also refers to muscle building and sugar storing, if you want to call it that, glycogen storage in muscles and liver. The primary prototypical anabolic hormone is insulin. And so whenever we talk about anabolism, you're usually referring, implicitly at least, to insulin to some extent or another. So in this case, we're talking about insufficient insulin to stimulate these anabolic processes, one of them being electrolyte maintenance, another one being thyroid hormone production. So, with that being said, that's what I define as long-term ketosis. It used to be the case that I defined it as exhibiting a low I to G ratio, insulin to glucagon ratio, for extended periods of time. A low I to G ratio being too low, insufficient to stimulating anabolic processes. However, that is actually not exactly true. Yes, I can be wrong sometimes. After further thought, I realized that it's not exactly accurate because you can actually have an elevation in the absolute level of insulin that is sufficient to stimulating anabolic processes like thyroid hormone production and electrolyte maintenance, while also simultaneously exhibiting an even higher increase in glucagon, meaning that the ratio actually goes down, I to G ratio goes down, but the absolute level of insulin reaches a point where you actually still get electrolyte maintenance and you get thyroid hormone production adequate. So anyway, I know that that gets into technical territory, but over time, over multiple repetitions, it gets to be intuitive. So anyway, with all that out of the way, it explains why many people that start developing these problems immediately jump to the carbohydrate train. Because what macronutrient stimulates the release of insulin more than any other per unit of mass? Well, it's carbohydrates. And there's a reason for that. Insulin not only is involved in anabolic processes like the storage of glucose and the creation of fat and the storage of fat, like I already said, but it's also involved in the process of oxidizing glucose. Really, I put it in quotes for reasons that are, again, technical, and I'll leave it out of the video, but basically the utilization of glucose to create ATP in the mitochondria. Okay, that is what insulin is also involved in. It's not technically an anabolic process, but it's another process that insulin is involved in. And so when glucose levels are higher in the blood, insulin levels are going to go up in order to bring that glucose level down. In multiple ways, whether it be through, once again, glucose utilization to create ATP, so to create energy, to store it in the liver and the muscles for later use in the form of glycogen, or glucose can actually be used to create fat for further storage. So, of course, glucose directly, consuming glucose directly, is going to be the most conducive way of stimulating the release of insulin more than any other macronutrient. Fat, not so much. Fat is very, very poor when it comes to the stimulation of the release of insulin from the pancreas. It's very, very low. It will release some of it, so it doesn't have an absence of an effect, but it has a very little effect to the point of little to no significance at all. But there's another macronutrient that's missing, and it's amino acids, or in other words, more colloquially known as protein. Protein stimulates insulin secretion as well, for two reasons. Number one, it stimulates it directly at the level of the pancreas, and the reason for that, I believe is because amino acids are absolutely involved in being used for muscle protein synthesis. And insulin is responsible for ushering those amino acids into muscle cells for muscle protein synthesis. But the other reason why insulin is released is because amino acids are used to create glucose via gluconeogenesis. Almost all of them actually are gluconeogenic. I think there's only 2 that aren't. When that glucose is created and it enters the bloodstream, what happens when glucose levels go up? Well, then you will have an increase in insulin as well. So there's 2 reasons why protein can stimulate glucose. But with that being said, why do people go to carbohydrates then? Protein is not that difficult to get down. This brings me to some assumptions. Number 1 is a money thing. In fact, I just recently got done recording an interview between myself and Richard Smith. Many people know of him in this space. Very intelligent guy, very nice guy. The thing that we talked about, and by we I really mean he talked about, was the fact that many of these health influencers that develop these problems, they realize that not only are carbohydrates able to stimulate insulin more than protein, which doesn't necessarily mean that you should be consuming them, which, you shouldn't be. They also realize that it is a way of selling a more broad message. They're thinking of it in a marketing way. They know that it will get them more views. They know that it will get them more money to do so. So that's one reason. Another reason I actually sympathize with quite a bit, and it's a reflexive response out of fear. I've talked about this before whenever I've critiqued Paul Saladino on this channel. I've done so ad nauseum, really. And I think that there is a possibility that that might be what it was. You see, anyone that's been sick in this space understands that as soon as you develop a small symptom that someone that hasn't been sick would think of as nothing, your immediate response is to find the quickest cure, whether it be a palliative cure or whether it be an absolute cure to the condition, to the symptom. If you've been chronically ill or are chronically ill, you understand how scary that is. And so you can get very reflexive. I mean, you can get illogical. And so that might also be what it was. And so in order to substantiate and in order to justify that decision, instead of recognizing that it was one that was done out of fear, perhaps, they try and dress it up and adorn it with mini truths, if that makes sense. And I think that is one of the other things that we may be seeing in the influencer space, the carnivore influencer space, or really we should say health space, because they're no longer carnivore, which is my entire point. So that's one of the main points of this video, is to explain why that may be happening. But the other main point of this video is what I'm going to get to right now, which is if you are developing symptoms that mimic the low or too low of insulin over extended periods of time phenomenon, I implore you to not jump reflexively to carbs unless you absolutely have to for one time. You can use sugar as what it actually is, a drug. In fact, it's a lot better of a drug than the synthetic ones, like statins or something like that. And it would be foolish to say otherwise. At least your body recognizes glucose and knows what it is. But only do it once if you absolutely need to. Prioritize the protein if you are having a situation like that. We as humans are designed to be carnivores. We already know that. If you don't know that, check out my 5 central carnivore tenets video. It's probably not called that. It's something along the lines of the carnivore diet explained in 5 simple rules or steps, if you have not already. But not all carnivores are the same. Some of them eat more protein in relation to fat, and some of them eat more fat. And from every inference we have, we are designed to be moderate protein, high fat carnivores. Of course, at the end of the day, you want to go by your appetite. But the reason I even bring this up is because when I say prioritize protein, there's a lot of people in the carnivore space that say prioritize protein always. And I don't think that that should be a ubiquitous or universal general rule for everyone. I think that the general rule should be high fat, moderate protein in terms of what humans should be eating. But with that being said, don't fear the propaganda of, oh, eating carnivore is going to cause you to have poor thyroid function, poor electrolyte maintenance, muscle cramps, all these things that are associated with actual bona fide long-term ketosis, which is basically the first stage of starvation. Because eating sufficient protein absolutely will curtail the issue. The key is to have it in one bolus, however. If you have trouble getting enough protein down, ostensibly through just your appetite guiding you alone, then a good general rule, I believe, is 1.75 grams per kilogram of lean body mass. Lean body mass being very roughly calculated by taking your height in meters squared and multiplying it by 22.5, which is considered the optimal BMI. It's why it's a very rough estimate, because we all know the error around that measurement when it comes to BMI. So anyway, depending on how active you are, it could be up to 1.5 times that amount, but generally speaking, it's 1.75 grams per kilogram of estimated lean body mass. So, with that being said, join me next time when we have to crack down on more propaganda and fear-mongering, frankly. Or maybe criticizing someone else on the internet that believes themselves remotely competent to speak about ketosis in the first place, or something else like statistics or biochemistry. So, till then.